It was the kind of morning that feels carved out of ice, silent, colorless, and cold enough to make the air sting when you breathe. I woke before sunrise, though the light outside hadn't yet managed to cut through the heavy snow pressed against the porch rails. The house was still, the kind of stillness that hums in your ears. Then my phone lit up in the dark, a sterile blue glow slicing through the shadows. Transfer successful, Benson Investment Trust. The words sat there on the screen, too calm, too clean. $200,000 gone from the account Megan and I had shared for 25 years. The savings I'd spent a lifetime building. I sat upright, the warmth draining out of me faster than the coffee in the pot downstairs. Benson Investment Trust. I didn't know the name, didn't recognize it from any of our bills, our business, our life. But it was there, printed in black and white, a name that suddenly felt like a stranger standing in my home. Upstairs, I could hear the faint thrum of a hairdryer. Megan was getting ready for an early meeting, same as always. The air smelled faintly of lavender and the wood polish I'd used on the banister last weekend. I walked through the living room, and the silence followed me like a shadow. The wedding photo on the mantel caught the early light, her face frozen mid-laugh. The same smile that once steadied me now felt like a photograph of someone who'd already left. I called the bank. The woman on the other end had a voice trained for calm, professional, measured, untouched by the cold panic in mine. She confirmed the transfer, executed at 8:12 p.m., the night before, through Megan's registered device. I remembered the moment exactly. We'd been sitting across from each other at dinner. She'd been talking about her company expanding to Boulder. Her tone had been smooth, almost weightless, like she was narrating someone else's life. After the call ended, I stood by the kitchen window, watching snow drift past the glass like ash. I tried to remember, had she ever mentioned a Benson, a Kyle Benson? Nothing. Not once in 25 years. That night, she came home late. The front door opened with a sweep of cold air and the faint scent of her perfume, the one she'd worn since the first Christmas we spent together. She smiled, tired but polished. I didn't waste time. I held up the phone, the message still open. "Tell me about this," I said. She glanced at the screen, then smiled a small, practiced curve of the lips. Kyle needed some help, just a short loan. He's getting back on his feet in Boulder. I repeated the name. Kyle Benson. You have a brother named Kyle? She bent to unlace her boots, voice drifting between us like something rehearsed. I told you, it's nothing. Don't worry. Don't worry. The words echoed in my head, hollow and metallic, bouncing off the walls of an empty studio. She went upstairs, her heels tapping out a rhythm that grew softer, then stopped. Every step was like a small fracture in something already cracked. I stayed up, went down to the garage. The light flicked on, humming faintly. Dust floated in the beam like suspended snow. Against the far wall hung the old sign from my workshop, Jensen Soundworks. The letters were faded, the wood warped with age, but the line I'd carved years ago was still there. Truth has a frequency. I ran my fingers across the words, then powered on an old recorder. The machine whirred to life, the red light blinking. I adjusted the mic, turned the gain, and let the room breathe. The wind outside slid through the cracks, a low hiss that grew into a steady tone. I tapped the desk once, twice, and listened to the echo bounce back. Too sharp, too fast. Distortion. I'd spent half my life chasing perfect sound. I could tell when something was off, when a note rang wrong, when a current trembled against the grain. That night, I realized it wasn't just the room. The noise was coming from somewhere deeper. My marriage had gone out of tune. Through the small window, the upstairs light glowed. Years ago, that light had meant laughter, warmth, the sound of her voice drifting down the stairs. Now it was sterile, a hospital bulb over something that used to live. I turned off the recorder, and for a long time just listened to the clock in the hall. Each tick landed with the precision of a countdown. By morning, the storm had thickened. Snow pressed against the windows, swallowing sound. She left early, heels clicking down the steps, the front door closing softly behind her. I stayed behind, opened my laptop, and saw a new email waiting. Transfer request pending approval. Same account, same amount, same name, same time, as before. Right when we'd been sitting across from each other at dinner. I froze every transaction. The bank called back within minutes. The woman's voice was careful this time. Would you like to know who initiated the request? I looked out the window. The world outside was white and silent, untouched. No, I said. I'll hear it from her. That night, The snow fell harder. Her headlights swept across the yard in long silver lines before cutting off. I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the kitchen behind me. The air smelled faintly of coffee and winter dust. She stepped in, shaking off her coat, eyes tired, smile thin. "You moved the money," I said quietly. She sighed, that soft, controlled sound she used when she wanted to end a conversation before it began. "You worry too much, Cole. Kyle just needed help. I know what I'm doing." "Are you sure you even have a brother named Kyle?" For a second, she froze. Then, she looked away and started talking about her morning meeting. I didn't respond. She climbed the stairs, her footsteps fading. I sat alone, the wind clawing at the windows, the old clock ticking in its steady way. And beneath it all, there it was again, that faint, crooked hum, a wrong note in the quiet. It's strange how the world can hold its breath before everything breaks. That night, I understood something had already shifted. The frequency had changed. And I knew, no matter how deep it was buried, no matter how much it destroyed, I would have to find the true sound of the truth, the one that never lies. The next morning, the snow had begun to melt, leaving thin veins of water crawling down the driveway like silver threads. The sun was pale but sharp, reflecting off the wet asphalt in flashes that looked like cold metal. I sat in my study with a mug of coffee gone lukewarm, scrolling through my email, when the line at the top of the screen made my pulse skip. Transfer request, $180,000. Recipient, Benson Investment Trust. Time stamp, Auto 14 p.m. Last night, we had been sitting at the table together then, candles flickering, her voice steady as she talked about a project at work. Nothing in her tone had trembled. Nothing had given her away. I read the email twice, then again, as if repetition could make it less real. My hand felt cold around the mouse. I called the bank. The woman's voice on the other end was polite, trained, distant, the kind of tone that belongs to people who handle panic for a living. She said the transfer was valid, verified, digitally signed from both accounts, mine and Megan's. I hung up without saying another word. The silence that followed had weight to it. My head buzzed faintly, like static in an old speaker. I opened the drawer where I kept every document that mattered: insurance, investment records, tax forms, the remnants of a life built on precision. Halfway down the stack was a slim folder, stamped in blue ink. Short-term investment authorization. At the bottom, my own signature neat, unshaken, undeniably mine. But I couldn't remember signing it. I sat back, tried to rewind the memory. Then it came a few weeks earlier. I'd been in the garage, tinkering with the old soundboard, checking circuits for corrosion. Megan had come in holding a stack of papers. She smiled that soft, coaxing smile, said she just needed me to sign something for the insurance files. "It's just a formality," she'd said. I hadn't read it. I just signed, because after 25 years of marriage, you don't expect to have to read the fine print. Now, looking at the page, I felt a chill move through me that no heater could fix. The day stretched on, long and hollow. The house made small noises, the hum of the refrigerator, the metronome tick of the clock, the whisper of wind through the eaves. It all felt magnified, too clear. I thought about the money, about the small cabin by the lake I'd been dreaming of buying that summer, about the years I'd spent in the workshop at Jensen Soundworks sanding down wood and soldering metal to build something honest. I had told her once that the money was our safeguard, the proof that our future was secured. Now, that future had a name I didn't recognize. That evening, I played dumb. When she came home, the door opened to the smell of perfume and the clipped rhythm of her heels across the hardwood. I sat on the couch with the television on mute, the flicker of blue light painting her face as she walked in. "Did you eat?" she asked. "I did," I said. Then, after a beat, the bank notified me of another transfer. "You know anything about it?" She looked at me for 1 second, then smiled like the question was nothing more than a wrinkle in the evening. "I signed the investment papers, remember? Kyle needed a small fund to restart after losing his job in Houston." I placed my glass on the table, the sound sharp in the air. "I don't remember signing anything for that." Her tone softened, dipped into something between affection and reprimand. "You always forget. A few weeks ago in the garage, remember? I handed you the short-term authorization. You signed it right there. You were fixing something. You didn't even look up." The memory returned like a photograph developing underwater, her standing beside me, the smell of engine oil in the air, her hand resting lightly on my shoulder. "It's just a formality," she'd said. I'd been tired. I'd signed. She poured 2 glasses of red wine and slid one across to me. You don't have to worry. Kyle will pay it back once the first house sells. It's a good opportunity. I just wanted to help. I held the glass but didn't drink. The liquid caught the kitchen light, deep crimson, almost black. I don't know who Kyle is, I said slowly, and I don't recall agreeing to anything. From now on, every transaction from the joint account needs both our signatures. Understood? She hesitated for half a second, then smiled again, that same thin smile that meant nothing. She nodded. When she went upstairs, I went the other way, down to the garage. I switched on the light and opened the steel cabinet where I kept everything that mattered. Savings books, sale contracts, bank statements. I laid the authorization paper on the desk beside them. The bottom line caught my eye, printed neatly, then altered. A new phrase, written in blue ink darker than the rest, added after the fact. Transfer to Benson Investment Trust. My breath slowed. It was like hearing a song you'd written, played back in a key you didn't recognize the same melody, but warped just enough to break it. I took a photo of the page and emailed it to myself. Then I turned to the computer, pulled up the account's activity log. 2 unfamiliar IP addresses blinked back at me, one in Houston, one in Boulder, both matching the days she said she'd been traveling for work. The pieces began to fit. It was near midnight when she came downstairs, her voice soft, too casual. "You're still up?" I said I was reviewing tax files. She smiled, sleepy, and kissed my forehead before heading back upstairs. When her shadow disappeared beyond the last step, I sat in the dim light, the computer screen casting its cold glow across the metal desk. I watched the reflection tremble in the glass of the cabinet door. That was the night something inside me shifted. I knew I would never again take comfort in the softness of her tone, in the weightless way she said, "Trust me." I knew all I had to do was wait, because truth, when buried, hums to be found. Outside, the snow began to fall again, thin and steady. I opened the garage door and let the cold rush in. The wind carried a low metallic tremor, the kind of sound only someone trained to hear would notice. It was deep and real and wrong, and I understood then this was only the overture, the first note of a truth that would no longer stay quiet. When I pulled the garage door shut, the clang of metal against steel echoed through the dark like the final chord of a sad, unfinished song. The next morning, I called Anna. My voice tried to sound steady, but came out rough, scraped at the edges. She worked at the First National Bank of Colorado, in internal auditing, precise, methodical, the kind of work where truth came in numbers instead of words. She asked if everything was all right. I told her it was family business, that we needed to meet. I picked the cafe near downtown Neutral Ground, quiet enough for the kind of conversation where silence mattered more than what was said. She arrived on time, as she always did. A beige coat, hair tied neatly back, face composed and focused. For a moment, I saw her as the student she once was, the same posture, the same unflinching calm before a difficult exam. My coffee had gone cold by the time she sat down. "Dad," she said softly, studying me, "you don't look okay." I pushed my phone across the table. The list of transactions glowed faintly on the screen. "Take a look at these. Tell me if they seem legitimate." Her eyes scanned the lines, growing narrower with each entry. "Kyle Benson," she read aloud. "Boulder, Colorado. Do you know him?" "No," I said. "And if your mother has a brother by that name, she's kept him secret for 25 years. Anna's brows furrowed. Her finger hovered above the screen. The transactions repeat. Large sums. The recipient account is less than a year old. She looked up. "What did Mom say about this?" "She said he's her brother," I replied evenly. "Investing in real estate." Anna bit her lip, thought for a long second, then shook her head. "She's never mentioned a brother." Outside, sunlight glanced off patches of melted snow, the reflections bright and cold. Cars crawled through the slush, their engines blending with the wind like background noise from a recording that hasn't been mastered yet. "I need your help," I said. "Go through everything the last 6 months." She hesitated, voice lowering. "Dad, if this is between you and Mom, maybe you should just ask her directly." "Not without proof," I said. That afternoon, I brought her the paper statements. Her office was small but immaculate chrome desk, fluorescent light reflecting off the glass surface. She opened her laptop, logged into the interbank verification system. Lines of numbers began scrolling across the screen, like an endless code. The rhythmic clicking of her keyboard reminded me of the soft metallic taps inside a recording machine. Each keystroke felt like a step deeper into something irreversible. After nearly an hour, she stopped typing, lifted her eyes. Dad, she said quietly, it's worse than you thought. My back pressed against the chair. How much worse? She turned the screen toward me. Over the last 6 months, half your joint account's been drained. $270,000. 8 separate transfers, all to the same account under Kyle Benson, Boulder Credit Union. The numbers stared back at me like a pattern I couldn't unsee. My hands clenched on the table, heartbeat loud in my ears. Anna pointed to the notes section of each record. They're all labeled Real Estate Investment Assistance, the same date you said you signed that authorization form. I asked if there was a way to prove her mother initiated the transfers. Anna leaned closer to the screen. It's difficult, but there's something odd. Every transaction was confirmed from a Houston IP address, not Denver. I looked at her sharply. Has your mother ever been to Houston? She nodded slowly. 3 months ago. She said she was attending a marketing conference. I remembered that week her suitcase by the door, the way she refused my offer to drive her to the airport. It's a short trip, she'd said. Don't bother. Anna turned off the monitor, folded her hands. Her voice was calm but weighted. Dad, you need to stay level-headed. If this is fraud, she's already left traces. She doesn't make mistakes, I said. Anna met my eyes. Everyone makes mistakes when they think they can't be caught. We sat in silence for a long time. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the conflict there, a mix of fear, empathy, and something that looked almost like mourning. Do you think your mother could actually do this? I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away, poured herself a glass of water instead. I don't know, she said finally. But I'll find out. I'll cross-check the logs against the bank's master files. I don't want you dragged into this, I said. She smiled faintly. Dad, I'm an auditor, not a child. I'll be careful. That night, I went home early. The house was dark, still carrying the scent of her perfume from the night before. I turned on the desk lamp, spread the papers across the surface. Dates, amounts, account numbers. The repetition was brutal in its precision. Every transaction matched the days she'd claimed to be on business trips. I pulled out the photo of her itinerary she'd sent me months ago. Each conference aligned perfectly with a withdrawal. The key turned in the front lock. She stepped in, brushing snow off her coat, smiling when she saw me. You're home early, she said. I kept my tone light, just catching up on some paperwork. She glanced at the table. What are you looking at? Old tax files. She nodded, placed her purse on the chair. Her hand brushed a strand of hair from her face, the wedding ring catching the lamplight. It flashed once a small, perfect circle, and in that moment, I realized how far I'd drifted from everything I once recognized. That night, the house hummed with its usual noises, the refrigerator's soft whir, the whisper of wind against the window panes. I sat in the dark, replaying the numbers Anna had shown me. Every transfer was a note out of tune, a discordant sound breaking through the music of a life I thought I knew by heart. The next morning, my phone rang. Anna. Her voice was low but urgent. Dad. I finished cross-checking. Every transfer was verified using Mom's electronic ID, no dual confirmation, and I found the real address for Kyle Benson. Boulder, Arapahoe Avenue. I sent it to you. I opened the email. There it was a simple line of text. A street. A number. You're sure? I asked. Completely, she said. If this is fraud, she's already left her fingerprints. When the call ended, I didn't move. Outside, snow had started again, slow, deliberate, each flake falling like a heartbeat counting down. I sat there, listening to it hit the glass, soft but certain, marking time like the first measures of a song I knew I would have to play until the very last note. The night had gone still by the time I stood from the couch. The soft yellow light from the living room lamp washed everything in a muted warmth that couldn't reach my hands. I poured myself a glass of water. The faucet hissed like static through an empty channel. Outside, snow was falling heavier now, thick flakes drifting through the streetlight's dull amber glow, blurring the houses into a quiet, colorless film. I stared at the email, still open on my phone, the address Anna had sent. Arapahoe Avenue, Boulder. I'd looked it up on the map, seen the neighborhood in satellite view. 2-story houses, new builds, driveways lined with evergreens, less than an hour from Denver. Too ordinary, too specific to be a coincidence. Saturday came. Megan suggested making dinner. It had been months since she'd done that herself. Ryan came home too, carrying store-bought desserts and a practiced smile. The kitchen filled with the smell of roast meat and fresh bread, warm enough to make breathing feel heavy. Even the air seemed layered with her perfume, the sweet burn of wine, the faint hum of the oven. I sat at the head of the table, across from her, waiting. Halfway through the meal, I asked casually, keeping my tone even, "How's Kyle doing? The Boulder investment making progress?" The knife in her hand hesitated, just a heartbeat, before continuing. "He's fine. He's working on the first property. A few more months and it'll be ready." I nodded, lifted my glass, watched her through the rim as I drank. "Is he renovating it himself or hiring someone?" She smiled, not looking up. "He's working with some friends. You don't need to worry." Ryan looked up from his phone, frowning. "Dad, Mom's just helping family. You don't have to be suspicious about everything." His voice carried that quick irritation of someone too young to understand betrayal. I looked at him, then back at Megan. "I'm not suspicious," I said quietly. "But $200,000 isn't pocket change. When it's family, clarity is respect." Her smile vanished. She set the knife down. "You don't trust me, do you? After all these years, you still can't?" "Trust," I said, "isn't a habit. It's something that has to stay earned." The air around the table thickened. Ryan shifted, muttered, "You're taking this too far." "Maybe," I said, pushing back my chair. I started gathering plates. "Sit down," Megan said sharply. "I can clean up." Her voice had that edge, the kind that cut quicker than it should. I stopped, nodded, and stepped aside. Later that night, when the house was quiet again, I went to the garage. The light flicked on with a dry hum. The workbench sat against the far wall, lined with old tools, silent witnesses to all the years I believed things could be fixed. On the shelf was a wooden box I hadn't opened in a long time. Inside lay the first microphone I ever built. Its metal was cold, the engraving still clear. Truth has a frequency. I turned the dial. The mic buzzed faintly, the low hum alive again. I remembered those years at Jensen Soundworks, how even the smallest deviation in tone, a fraction of a frequency off, could change everything. A sound engineer doesn't guess. He listens. He knows when something's false. And now, standing in my own home, I could hear it again. That same faint distortion. Not in the walls, not in the wiring, in the people, in her voice, in the pauses between her words. I set the mic down and opened my laptop. Anna had sent another email, an updated report, cleanly formatted, annotated in her precise handwriting. "Dad, every transfer matches the days Mom was traveling. I'll keep digging." I looked from the glowing screen to the staircase beyond the door. Upstairs, I heard soft footsteps, then the faint click of a bedroom door closing. I shut the computer and turned to the filing cabinet. From the bottom drawer, I pulled the old property records, the papers from when we'd bought this house. Our signatures side by side, neat, aligned. I remembered her hand squeezing mine that day, her voice trembling with excitement. We finally have a place of our own. Now those same signatures looked different, still aligned, but hollow, like echoes left behind after the music has stopped. A car passed outside, tires hissing over wet snow. The sound pulled me back. I grabbed my coat, stepped out into the cold. The wind was sharp, the kind that pricked through fabric. The whole neighborhood glowed under the soft wash of amber streetlight and falling snow. The air was clear enough to sting. I took a long breath and let the cold settle into me, freezing the noise in my head. When I turned back, Ryan was standing at the garage door, arms crossed. His face was a mix of confusion and anger. "Dad," he said, "why are you treating Mom like this? Do you know how much it's hurting her?" I looked at him steadily. "When you hear a wrong note," I said, "do you pretend it's still part of the song?" He frowned. "What are you even talking about?" I didn't answer. I just nodded once and walked past him into the house. It was late when Megan came into the bedroom. Her voice was soft, almost careful. "Are you still upset about dinner?" I didn't answer. She sat beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. "I know you're tired. I just wanted to help someone close to me. That's all." I turned to face her under the dim light of the bedside lamp. "Someone close?" I asked. "In 25 years, you've never once mentioned him." She looked away, blinking too quickly. "You've been suspicious for too long. You used to trust me. What happened?" Outside, the wind pressed against the glass, a long, hollow moan through the frame. "The sound's the same," I said softly. "It's just the voice that's changed." She stood, said nothing more, and left the room. The door closed quietly, almost respectfully. I sat up, the lamp's glow catching the old plaque on the wall, the one I'd carved years ago. Truth has a frequency. The letters were worn, the edges blurred, but they still spoke. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind outside, to my heartbeat, to the almost imperceptible hitch in the breathing of the woman who once said she loved me. Somewhere beneath all that, I could still hear it, the same wrong note, the faint distortion in a song I thought I'd written together with her. And I knew it would keep playing until I found the source, until I heard the original version, uncorrupted, clear, the truth. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. The light outside was thin and colorless, the kind that feels reluctant to return after a long night. I brewed coffee stronger than I should have, let the scent fill the kitchen, then stood by the window, watching the last traces of snow cling to the fence like unspoken words. The phone on the counter buzzed, bolder, the address Anna had found. I looked at it one last time, then turned the screen off. I didn't drive there. I didn't storm into anyone's front yard like a man undone. Instead, I made a different call to Mary Collins. Mary and I went back years, to when Jensen's soundworks still echoed with solder and wood dust. She had been one of our legal consultants, sharp enough to turn a handshake deal into a fortress. Now she ran her own firm downtown, specializing in family law and asset protection. "I need to see you," I said. My voice was low but steady. She paused only a second before answering, "Come by. Don't wait." By the time I reached Denver, the sky was clear but the air sliced cold enough to bite through my coat. Mary's office sat on the 11th floor of a glass tower overlooking Broadway. Inside, the reception area was small, wood floors dark and polished, the air thick with the smell of paper and toner. Her door was half open. I stepped in. The winter light from the tall windows cut across her desk, streaking over a stack of folders marked with neon ink. Mary stood to greet me, her brown hair tied back, her expression already reading the story I hadn't yet told. "You've got something heavy," she said. I nodded. I told her everything, from the first transfer alert to the Benson Investment Trust, the business trips to Houston, the Boulder address, the strange ink on the authorization form. I spoke until the words ran out. She listened without interruption, her pen hovering, eyes sharp as a metronome keeping time. When I finished, she exhaled slowly, then opened a fresh notebook. "If it's as you say," she said, "then what you need isn't confrontation. It's containment. You need to isolate your assets now and put a legal wall between yourself and anything she can reach." Her tone was calm, but it carried the kind of certainty that makes denial feel foolish. I handed her a folder from my briefcase statements, contracts from the workshop sale, pension documents, the authorization form. She went through them carefully, the way someone reads, not for story but for threat. When she reached the authorization, she tilted it under the lamp. "The ink's inconsistent," she murmured. Different pen. The description line was added later. She looked up. "That's good. We can request metadata from the bank timestamps, server records. If they match your story, it'll hold." "Will that prove the original intent was altered?" I asked. "If the audit trail's clean, yes. But before we talk about court, I want you to do something else." She pulled a document from her drawer, a printed form outlining the structure of a self-settled trust. "You'll open a trust account independent, irrevocable. You'll be the grantor and the beneficiary. The trustee will be appointed by the bank. I'll draft the paperwork myself. Your pension, your investment proceeds, everything moves there." I hesitated. "Won't that provoke her?" Mary's gaze didn't waver. In cases like this, her anger doesn't make you safer. We spent the next 3 hours building walls out of words. Mary called a contact in the trust division of a partner bank, speaking in the clipped rhythm of legal shorthand. I followed maybe half of it. She secured a same-day appointment. By noon, we were walking 2 blocks through the wind to the bank branch. The lobby was quiet, echoing faintly under the pale fluorescent lights. The clerk at the trust counter greeted Mary by name, brought out a thick stack of forms. I signed where she pointed, read where she insisted I read. For the first time in weeks, the process felt solid, deliberate, protective. When I signed the last page, the clerk smiled politely. "Your trust account is now active. V. Mary leaned back. "Now for the hard part," she said. "Move the pension." She had me call the pension fund right there in the lobby. I read the trust's routing number, confirmed my identity through an exhausting series of security questions. The woman on the line said the transfer would finalize within 2 hours. Back in Mary's office, I sat in the waiting area while she went for coffee. My phone buzzed before she returned. Transfer complete. Pension account closed. Then another notification. Transfer request denied, source account unavailable. Mary stepped through the doorway just as the second alert came in. Our eyes met. She walked over, opened her laptop, logged into the banking portal. A log entry appeared on the screen, an attempted withdrawal from the joint account, time-stamped 3 minutes earlier. Mary's voice was calm. She tried to move the rest. I said nothing. My pulse was steady, but inside it felt like the moment before feedback, that thin electric tension right before sound breaks. "Don't react," Mary said quietly. "Just stay silent." I leaned back in the chair, the weight of it all pressing down but not crushing me. I looked out the window at the city below Denver in its winter brightness, the streets glinting under the afternoon sun, people moving through their lives unaware that someone, somewhere, had just crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Half an hour later, I walked out into the wind. The air hit hard, carrying grit and cold. I pulled my coat tighter and looked at my phone. 3 missed calls. 1 message. I tried calling the bank all morning. "System glitch? The transfer won't go through. It's driving me crazy." Her words were light, almost annoyed, but to me they sounded like the last notes of a song collapsing into static. I slipped the phone into my pocket and kept walking. When I got home that evening, the kitchen lights were on. Megan stood by the counter, the phone wedged between her shoulder and cheek, her tone clipped and frustrated. She was talking to someone at the bank, her voice laced with irritation. When she noticed me, she hung up and smiled, the transition instant and practiced. "How was your day?" "Ordinary," I said. She poured a glass of water, her voice breezy again. "Bank systems have been a mess lately. Everything's glitching." I nodded, as though I believed her. "You working late tonight?" "No. Might head to Boulder early tomorrow, though. Meeting with a real estate group." I smiled faintly. "Good luck." Dinner was quiet. She picked at her food, glanced at her phone every few minutes. I asked about small things, the weather, the neighbors, nothing that mattered. The silence between us no longer felt suffocating. Just settled. Later, I went down to the garage under the pretext of checking the generator. I turned on the light, opened the steel cabinet, and locked away every file, every piece of paper. The key was cold in my hand, a small, sharp weight of certainty. I checked the back door, the windows, everything sealed. When I switched the light off, the soft click echoed louder than it should have. In that darkness, something inside me finally stilled. Before dawn, my phone vibrated again. A new email from the bank. "Due to unusual activity, your joint account has been temporarily restricted. All large transfers will require in-person verification." I read it twice. Then I set the phone down and lay back. Beside me, Megan's breathing was slow and even. I looked up at the ceiling, the faint line of morning light beginning to bleed through the curtains. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air shift clean, deliberate, almost silent. I smiled into the dark, a small, tired smile, because now, at last, I knew what to do next. And I knew I would stay quiet long enough to hear everything. That morning, sunlight finally broke through after days of gray. I was in the garage, wiping dust from an old row of speakers, when I heard the knock. It was Linda Howard, my neighbor from across the street. She wore a wool hat and carried a basket of muffins. She said she'd stop by because she'd noticed my truck hadn't moved all week and wanted to make sure I wasn't sick. I let her in and poured tea. She talked a bit about the weather, about gas prices. Then her voice softened. She said she'd seen Megan in Boulder the week before. My hand froze on the teacup. Linda said Megan looked rushed, distracted but not alone. She was with a tall man, dark hair, gray coat. His hand rested on her back as they walked out of a showroom together. They laughed, leaned close, spoke softly in that way people do when they've known each other too long to pretend otherwise. Linda said she hadn't meant to mention it. She'd just found it strange. Megan had told her she was out of town for a marketing conference. I kept my voice calm. "Which showroom?" She remembered the name. Corner of Pearl Street, downtown Boulder. Then she scrolled through her phone and found a photo, one she'd taken of a mirrored wall inside the showroom, because, she said, the reflection was pretty. In that reflection, Megan stood beside the man in the gray coat, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. I didn't need to zoom in. I saw her eyes. There was no guilt in them. No disguise. Only something close to happiness. Something I hadn't seen on her face in years. Linda said she hadn't meant to interfere. She just thought I should know. I thanked her, told her it was probably a misunderstanding. She seemed unconvinced but didn't press. Before leaving, she said quietly, "If you ever need someone to talk to, I'm around." After she left, I sat in the living room. Sunlight angled through the blinds, sharp and gold. The photo glowed on my phone screen. I stared until the light dimmed. That afternoon, I printed the image, slid it into an envelope, placed it with the other files I'd been keeping, the bank statements, the authorization form. All of it lay there, silent and exact, evidence that didn't need to raise its voice. I wrote a note in the corner. Boulder, February 2024. When the ink dried, I folded it neatly and locked it in the steel cabinet. The sound of the latch was soft, but final enough to feel like a heartbeat stopping. Night came quietly. Megan called, said she was meeting with clients and would be home late. Her tone was casual, practiced. I said fine, and hung up. After dinner, I went down to the garage. The white light overhead was cold and unforgiving. Dust motes drifted through it like static. I opened the small door to my old recording room, a box I hadn't entered in months. The foam panels were yellowed. The wooden desk still bore faint coffee rings from years ago. I turned on the Revox recorder. The machine whirred softly, then settled into a low hum. From the drawer, I pulled an old magnetic reel, the kind I used back when I was testing prototype mics. I threaded it through the rollers, pressed play. After a moment, the sound came. Wind through ductwork, metal brushing metal. A deep, living breath of noise. Every vibration, every pause, every imperfection, it was all honest. That's what I'd always loved about sound. It doesn't lie. It either exists or it doesn't. I closed my eyes. The image appeared again, her hand on his shoulder, her smile reflected in the glass, the daylight of Boulder caught in her hair. I opened my eyes, pulled a pen from the drawer, and wrote on the file folder, "Boulder photo verified." Then I placed it back inside, locked the cabinet. The tape slowed to a stop, the reels clicking softly in the silence. A minute later, I heard the sound of a car outside. Headlights cut across the curtains, stopped in the driveway. Megan was home. I didn't move. She had her own key. The front door opened quietly. Footsteps crossed the hallway, unhurried. She called my name once, softly. I didn't answer. I listened to her shoes sliding off, the whisper of her coat on the hanger, the creak of the stairs as she went up. Then nothing. I stopped the recorder, removed the tape, placed it back in its box. And I sat there, calm in a way that had nothing to do with peace. It wasn't forgiveness, it was acknowledgement. The slow realization that everything I'd suspected was already telling its own story, one frequency at a time. Every number on the bank statements, every signature slightly off, every reflection in that mirror, they were all notes in the same composition. All I had to do was listen. I turned off the lights, leaving only the faint glow from the control panel. The room faded to shadow. The wind outside merged with the rhythm of my own pulse, two steady beats in unison. I thought of Anna, her quiet certainty when she'd said, "Mom left traces." She was right, and for the first time, I knew I was following the right sound. I locked the door to the studio, stood still in the dark garage. The air smelled of metal and pine, tinged with the cold breath of snow slipping in through the seams. Above the workbench, the old plaque still hung on the wall, its letters worn but legible. "Truth has a frequency." I whispered it once under my breath, the words weightless but alive. And for the first time, I could hear it clear, unwavering, and impossibly real. The next morning, Denver woke under a rare, piercing clarity. The air was brittle, clean, and cruelly bright, the kind of light that doesn't warm anything it touches. I had just finished sweeping the garage when my phone rang. It was Anna. Her voice was quiet but clipped, carrying the edge of something she'd rehearsed. "Dad, can you come to my office? I found something." I didn't ask what. I just said I was on my way. The drive through the suburbs shimmered with melting snow. Patches of sunlight spilled across the pavement like thin sheets of metal. I kept my hands steady on the wheel, the radio off, the silence thick. When I arrived, Anna was already waiting in a small conference room, a stack of folders on the table in front of her. She didn't stand when I entered. She simply pushed one document toward me. Her eyes were calm, almost too calm. "This is Mom's birth record," she said. "From the state database. There's no sibling listed, no one named Kyle Benson." For a long moment, I didn't move. Then I picked up the paper. It was thin, almost weightless, but it felt like metal in my hands. The text was plain, printed in the same government font that had recorded thousands of lives without care for what those names meant. No Kyle. No brother. Nothing but the clean, cruel emptiness of an empty field. I understand, I said finally, my voice smaller than I expected. Anna told me she'd double-checked every record property, census, tax filings. There was no trace of any Kyle Benson connected to Megan Jensen. Not by blood, not by address, not by anything. The name didn't exist. I thought of the photo from Boulder, the man in the gray coat, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. I asked Anna if she was absolutely certain. She met my eyes. I'm sure. I ran it through 3 systems. He's no one. That afternoon, I brought everything to Mary Collins. Her office sat on the 11th floor, same as before, sunlight slanting across the glass, the air crisp and thin from the mountains. She opened the file slowly, the way someone opens a wound they've seen too many times. When she looked up, she didn't ask for more details. She just nodded once. It's not going to end with money, she said. I asked what she meant. She said she would start the divorce filing and the asset protection measures, but there was something else we needed to consider. She tilted her head, her tone soft but deliberate. If she falsified information about her family, there's a chance she's hiding another financial channel. And if so, Cole, we may need a DNA test. The words didn't land right away. They just hung there, circling the room. She continued, slower this time. If those transfers are tied to the man in that photo, and if Ryan, she hesitated. If Ryan isn't biologically yours, the result will carry significant legal weight. I felt something hollow open inside me. Not shock, not pain, just a strange stillness, like the air before thunder. Are you ready for that possibility? She asked. I didn't answer for a long time. Then I said, do it, but don't tell Anna. She nodded, understood. The procedures were arranged quickly, quietly. Samples collected at a private lab. The rest was waiting. Days passed like ice melting in slow motion. Megan and I lived as though nothing had changed. She still left early, came home late. Her voice still floated through the house like a recorded message, polite, practiced, hollow. Ryan stopped by less often, but when he did, he smiled, called me Dad, laughed at small things. And every time, something in that sound broke rhythm. Not anger, just distance. A distance that didn't need words to measure. Then one afternoon, Mary called. Her voice was calm, careful. I'm near the office. Can you come by? When I arrived, the air in her office felt heavier. She handed me a thick brown envelope. It's here, she said quietly. You should read it alone. I sat down. My palms were flat on my knees. The world went mute. The only sound left was the pulse in my ears. The document opened easily, its edges crisp, the ink black as if the truth needed to be bold to be seen. No biological relationship detected between Cole Jensen and Ryan Jensen. Below it, in the confirmation line, a match. Ryan Jensen, Kyle Benson, confirmed biological relation. My eyes tracked the numbers, the charts, the percentages. Each symbol was clean, factual, and merciless. Mary said nothing. She didn't pity me. She just waited, as if she knew silence was the only respectful response. I folded the paper carefully, placed it back on the desk. My hands trembled. How long have you known? I asked. Since this morning, she said. I nodded, turned toward the window. Outside, snow had started falling again. Slow, deliberate flakes, like dust over something newly buried. The room was silent, the way a recording studio falls silent when the feed cuts out. Mary spoke at last. We'll file for divorce, with the financial fraud attached. The paternity discrepancy invalidates prior agreements. You don't need to confront her yet. Let the law handle it quietly, but thoroughly. I left the office without remembering the drive. The highway curved south toward Denver, long and empty. The trees were bare, their branches like ribs against the winter sky. I pulled over once, on a narrow shoulder, and let the engine idle. My breath came out white. I wasn't angry. I wasn't anything. Just a dry, metallic ache, like a wire pulled too tight. I thought of Ryan as a boy, his small hands fumbling with a screwdriver, the way his eyes lit up when the speaker first came alive with sound. That memory was still true. The blood never was. That night, when I came home, Megan was in the kitchen. Her coat hung on the chair, her hair tied hastily. She smiled when she saw me. talked about her upcoming trip, asked if I wanted to join. I shook my head. She looked at me longer than usual. Then she smiled again, the kind of smile that fit her face perfectly, but not her truth. I went to my study, opened the cabinet, placed the DNA report next to the Boulder photo. The wind outside pressed against the windows, carrying a low, continuous hum, the kind of sound that fills every corner until it becomes the only thing you can hear. Mary had been right. Some verdicts don't need a gavel. Sometimes, justice arrives on paper, and the only thing required of you is to be still enough to hear it fall. I turned off the lamp. The room folded into darkness. Outside, the snow kept falling slow, heavy, and unrelenting, like the sound of truth settling into the earth. I left the house before sunrise, when the air still carried the scent of thawed mud and snow. The streets were streaked with the memory of last night's storm. The sky, a low ceiling of pewter gray. As Denver disappeared behind me, the mountains ahead sharpened against the horizon dark blue ridges, motionless, as if waiting to be named. I took the highway toward Boulder. The fields stretched bare and windless, fences flashing by like frames from a reel that had been cut mid-scene. I didn't have a plan, no words rehearsed. I only knew I needed to see where my life's work, my money, my trust had gone. Boulder greeted me with a pale, colorless sky and air that stung the lungs dry. I parked near Arapahoe and killed the engine. The street was quiet, almost too neat. Rows of two-story houses lined up like clean notes on a staff white trim, gray siding, new roofs still smelling of resin and paint. I walked a short distance, stopped behind an old pickup, and waited. The house was easy to spot. Pale gray, modern windows, porch steps that looked freshly varnished. Even the house number gleamed, silver against the mailbox. The door opened. Kyle stepped out first, taller than I'd imagined, his movements brisk, efficient, gray coat, polished shoes, the kind of man who checked exits without looking like he did. And then came Megan, a cream sweater, a light blue scarf, hair pulled low, neat, no makeup or just enough to look effortless. She said something to him, and he smiled. His hand rested at the small of her back with the ease of habit and intimacy too casual to be innocent. Then the door opened again. Ryan emerged, phone in one hand, wallet in the other. He said something brief. Kyle pointed toward the end of the driveway, where a black SUV waited. The three of them stood close, heads bent over a set of plans I couldn't see, their laughter thin against the wind. That was my family, or what had once passed for it, and I was only now realizing how long I'd been written out of the frame. Kyle opened the passenger door for Megan, closed it gently, circled to the driver's side. Ryan slipped into the back seat without looking up. The SUV rolled down the street, turned toward Pearl, and vanished behind the line of birch trees. I waited a full minute before turning away, letting the sound of the engine dissolve into the wind. There was nothing left to say. Everything that mattered had already spoken in its own quiet language. The drive back to Denver was slower. The highway was empty, the birch trees on both sides rising like a corridor of tuning forks. The wind threaded through them, low and steady, a single deep tone that filled the silence. I thought of Anna, her face calm, her hand steady, as she slid the birth record across the table. I thought of Mary, her voice firm, each word nailed into place like timber in a frame. And I thought of Ryan Small again, leaning over the workbench while I taught him how to listen to the vibration of metal through a microphone. Those memories hadn't changed frequency. They were still true. Only the label had been wrong all along. By the time I reached my neighborhood, dusk had fallen. I pulled into the garage, turned off the engine, and sat there for a while. The ticking of the cooling hood, the only sound. Then I reached for the thick folder on the passenger seat and carried it to the workbench. I laid everything out in rows. Bank statements, transfer logs, the altered authorization form, the Boulder photograph, the DNA report, Mary's handwritten notes, numbered in blue ink. I sorted them not by emotion, but by sequence. Dates, amounts, locations, digital footprints, image, evidence, biological, evidence. Each piece found its place. I set my phone on the stand and opened the document scanner. One by one, the pages lit up on the screen, edges cropped, names sharp. I titled each file, saved them in order, then opened my laptop. A new folder, a secure link, a short message to Mary, documents as discussed. Originals retained. Her reply came almost instantly. Received. Building submission draft tonight. By the time the light outside dimmed to amber, Megan texted that she'd be late. I watched the notification fade off the screen. I didn't respond. I cooked a simple soup, ate slowly, washed every dish. The house stayed unnaturally still, as if it understood that tonight required silence. Upstairs in my study, I turned on the desk lamp and arranged the folder neatly. One final time. The Boulder photo sat on top, the corner marked in blue ink. February 2024. Her face in that reflection was bright, alive, the same brightness that once belonged to us. I knew now it was only borrowed light. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Mary. A checklist. Freeze all secondary cards. Contact the court office for filing confirmation. Back up all data to an external drive. I followed every step. The external drive blinked for a few seconds, then went still. I wrote down the temporary case number on a notepad. Just numbers, precise, bloodless. Megan came home as I finished. The door opened softly. 2 measured footsteps. Then her voice from the hallway. "Do you want some tea?" "No, thanks," I said. "I have to leave early tomorrow," she added. "Meeting in Longmont." I murmured something non-committal. She stood in the doorway for a moment, eyes flicking to the folder on my desk, then turned away. Her footsteps quickened down the hall. Later, alone again, I pulled the Boulder photo from the folder one last time. The paper was warm from my hands. I looked at the 3 figures on the porch, the pale house behind them, sunlight glinting off the windows like proof. Then I slid the photo back under the stack. Layer upon layer of evidence flattened into a perfect, silent order. I pressed my palm to the top sheet. The smell of paper, ink, and old wood mixed in the still air. A single thought surfaced, clear as a bell. She thought she was one step ahead, but she never heard the sound of me listening. I sent one final email to Mary, confirming all accounts locked and the hard copies ready for delivery in the morning. Then I closed the laptop, placed the folder in the locked drawer, and stood still. I circled the room once, checked the window latch, adjusted the blinds. The streetlight outside threw a long stripe of gold across the floorboards. I stayed there a moment longer, breathing with the house. Every sound had found its place. Every silence, too. 3 months passed faster than I expected. April arrived in Denver, clear but cold, the kind of cold that lived inside the air, not around it. The sky was rinsed clean of clouds. The wind moved like glass. I stepped out of the car in front of the family court on Bannock Street. The courthouse loomed in gray stone, tall and still, like a monument built to outlast emotion. Mary was waiting on the steps, arms crossed around a thick file. She greeted me with a brief nod, no sympathy, no small talk, just the quiet understanding of someone who had guided too many people through endings. Inside, the air smelled of paper and anxiety. Security made us empty our pockets, every piece of metal left behind, as if truth could only be spoken when you carried nothing sharp. Courtroom 3 was on the 2nd floor. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, falling in long diagonal bands across the wooden benches. The room had that peculiar stillness of places where people waited to be judged too quiet to breathe normally. I took a seat in the front row on the left. Mary sat beside me, spreading her papers like a surgeon, laying out instruments. Her notes were color-coded, corners aligned, her movements metronomic. She didn't argue so much as orchestrate tension. The door opened. Megan entered. Black suit, hair tied high, heels clicking with precision. Behind her was Kyle gray suit, polished shoes, his face rehearsed into neutrality. They sat across from us. Our eyes met for a single second. No love, no anger. Just the sterile space that exists between 2 panes of glass. Then Judge Marcia Lee entered, silver hair, immaculate posture, eyes that looked like they'd seen everything and believed nothing. She reviewed the file, asked a few formal questions about the marriage. Megan answered calmly, as though we were debating tax codes, not a life. When Mary began her presentation, Megan allowed herself a faint smile. She said Kyle was merely a business associate, an investor in a housing project, and that all transactions had my consent. I didn't move. Mary opened her briefcase and pulled out a large print of the Boulder photograph, sliding it across the table. "This," she said evenly, "was taken on the same date as the property transfer, both parties present." The judge adjusted her glasses, studying the image. "Megan Jensen," she said, "do you confirm you were in Boulder that day?" Megan hesitated. "I only stopped by to check materials," she murmured. Mary flipped to the next file and produced a matching bank statement. Same date, same time, same transaction. Kyle shifted, lowering his eyes. Megan's hand clenched slightly on her lap. Then Mary lifted the final envelope. She opened it slowly. as if the air itself needed to brace. She placed a single sheet on the table. "The DNA report," she said. The room fell still, the kind of stillness that makes sound itself seem guilty. Mary read it aloud, not loudly, not dramatically, just with precision. "No biological relationship detected between Cole Jensen and Ryan Jensen." The words fell one by one, each hitting the desk like a drop of cold metal. Then she read the second line. "A confirmed biological match between Ryan Jensen and Kyle Benson." Silence deepened. Megan's eyes widened, then narrowed, fighting for control. Her lips trembled, but no sound came. Ryan froze behind her, his hands interlocked so tightly the knuckles went white. Judge Lee stopped writing. "Mrs. Jensen," she said, "do you contest the authenticity of this report?" No answer. "Did you have prior knowledge of this information?" Still nothing. Megan turned toward me, then her face pale, eyes searching for something familiar. I met her gaze without hostility, the way you might look at a stranger who happens to share your last name. Mary gestured, and Anna rose from the back. She wore a gray coat, her hands shaking slightly as she held a folder. Her voice quivered, but each word rang clean. "My mother used my father's money to build another life." She paused, looking straight at the judge. Even the air seemed to stop moving. Kyle didn't lift his head. Judge Lee leaned back, tapping her pen once on the bench. Then she asked Anna a few questions, verifying the documents, marking her notes carefully. The sound of her pen scratching paper filled the room, dry, deliberate, endless. Finally, she spoke. "The court will review all submitted evidence. In the meantime, all shared assets are hereby frozen pending final judgment." Megan whispered something to her attorney, too low for anyone to catch. I stayed still. A beam of sunlight crossed the table, landing on the last page of the court transcript where Judge Lee signed her name. The sound of the pen against paper was barely audible, but I felt it final, irreversible. Every stroke of ink was another note in a closing symphony. I heard it clearly, the same way I had once heard the click of a switch in the dark, a small, perfect sound that ended everything. The hearing adjourned. Judge Lee instructed both sides to submit final supplements before April 15. Mary closed the file, looked at me, and said quietly, "Everything's moving in the right direction." I nodded. Megan left first. Her heels struck the marble floor like rapid-fire echoes. Kyle followed, ducking his head to avoid the waiting press. Ryan stayed seated, staring at his hands. When I passed him, he finally looked up. His eyes held something raw, half apology, half fear. I placed a hand on his shoulder, once. Then I walked on. Outside, the afternoon wind swept through the plaza, carrying the dry scent of dust and exhaust. Mary walked beside me, in silence. My footsteps on the pavement sounded sharp, steady, measured. Inside me, everything had gone quiet. No rage, no sorrow. Only the strange calm of someone who's heard the last note of a song and knows it doesn't need to be replayed. We stopped at the base of the courthouse steps. "The court will move quickly," Mary said. "A few weeks, maybe." I thanked her. The sky above Denver was a faint blue wash, sunlight bending against the courthouse windows. The stone facade reflected a pale, forgiving light. I turned away, descending each step slowly. The sound of my shoes merged with the wind, with the hum of traffic, with the faint echo still lingering in my head, the sound of the pen meeting paper. A thin, decisive sound. A verdict that didn't need words. 1 month later, the final judgment arrived. Morning hung over Denver like a pale breath fog, and the faint smell of old snow clinging to the air. I parked near the courthouse before the city had fully woken, and stood on the stone steps watching the first thin beams of light break through the clouds. Everything looked still, almost peaceful, but somewhere inside I knew this was the coda, the final measure of a song that had gone on too long. Mary met me in the hallway, wrapped in her long coat, a thick file pressed against her chest. Her face was calm, composed, her voice steady. "We'll be fine," she said quietly. I nodded. In my head, the only sound was the courthouse clock, each second a metronome counting down to the moment when nothing could be undone. Courtroom 3 was crowded that morning. Reporters gathered near the door, the scent of coffee and new paper mixing with the electric hush of anticipation. I sat in the front row, hands clasped, feeling the cold imprint of the wedding band that was no longer there. The door opened. Megan walked in black coat, hair tied back, face sharp and hollow. Beside her, her attorney carried a briefcase too full for comfort. Kyle wasn't there. Rumors said he'd left the state a week earlier, though his name still appeared neatly under financial accomplice in the record. Judge Marcia Lee entered. 3 taps of the gavel. The murmur died. Sunlight struck her glasses, hiding her eyes. Her voice was low, controlled, the kind of voice that could cut fabric and leave clean edges. She began reading. The property in Boulder is to be repossessed due to falsified mortgage and fraudulent declaration of funds. The defendant, Kyle Benson, is charged with financial fraud, tax evasion, and identity falsification in connection with said investments. The respondent, Megan Jensen, is hereby stripped of all joint asset rights, corporate titles, and insurance benefits. All protected assets held under the trust account of Cole Jensen remain legally intact. Each word landed with the weight of iron. Each is hereby struck the air like a nail driven into quiet wood. No one moved. I looked at Megan. Her lips trembled. Her hands tightened around her purse until the leather folded in on itself. Her eyes never rose from the table. For a brief moment, I saw not the woman who once laughed over the hum of a kitchen radio, but a shadow being slowly swallowed by the silence of justice. Judge Lee closed the folder and looked up. "The ruling takes immediate effect," she said. The sound that followed wasn't applause nor relief, just the shuffling of paper, the ending of something that had no music left in it. Mary turned to me. "You won," she whispered. But victory wasn't what it felt like. It was simply clarity, the fog lifting, to reveal the wreckage exactly where I'd left it. I stood, nodded toward the bench, and left. Ryan was waiting at the end of the hall. His shirt was wrinkled, eyes red and rimmed with exhaustion. When I approached, he didn't speak. He just reached out his hand. It was cold, unsteady, but it held. We stood like that for a few seconds, long enough to remember that what connected us was no longer blood, but memory. When he let go, I heard him exhale a sound like someone stepping out of a room that had run out of air. I rested my hand on his shoulder, once, then kept walking. Outside, the wind was sharper. The courthouse steps glimmered with a silver light. Mary said she'd send me a copy of the ruling, along with next steps. I thanked her, though my voice came out distant, as if it belonged to someone else. That afternoon, I drove south through the city. The sunlight poured through the windshield, cutting across the dashboard. At a red light, I rolled down the window. The air smelled faintly of metal and burnt wood drifting from the industrial zone far away. A week later, I saw Megan again. Not by design. I had stopped by a small furniture shop on Colfax to buy pine boards for the workshop. The doorbell chimed when I entered, and there she was, behind the counter. Gray uniform, hair pinned up hastily, her face pale but clean, the kind of face that has learned the discipline of quiet. Light from the front window crossed her shoulders, catching the fine lines around her eyes. I froze for a moment. She looked up. Recognition passed between us like a current, faint, controlled, inevitable. She tried to smile. It barely held. Then she lowered her head and pretended to arrange a stack of invoices. I didn't say a word, just picked out what I needed, paid. Her hand shook slightly as she handed me the receipt. I took it, nodded once. No accusation, no forgiveness. Just 2 people who had once shared a song, now standing in different silences. When I left, the bell over the door rang again. She didn't look up. She didn't have to. Some losses are understood without turning around. I drove through the sunlit street, past rows of shop fronts and people moving through their separate days. At the next red light, I checked the rearview mirror. The little store was shrinking, fading, gone. Something inside me closed with it quietly, cleanly. That night, back home, I unlocked the garage. The yellow light spread across the workbench. I set down the bundle of pine boards, lifted the old plaque from the wall, and wiped away the dust. The words were still there, faint but legible. Truth has a frequency. I read it slowly, letting each syllable settle into the still air. Then I powered up the old recorder, plugged in the microphone, and pressed record. In the headphones, there was only the sound of wind outside the eaves, the rhythm of my heartbeat, and a thin, pure tone that stretched into silence. The sound of peace. I thought of Megan, of Ryan, of all the sounds that had made up this life. There's no perfect recording, only distortions you learn to live with, so the remaining notes stay clear. Outside, the night held its breath. The city lights flickered through the window, quiet and distant. And for the first time in years, I let the tape keep running. I left Denver on a morning at the end of May. The sky was a sheet of clean blue, sunlight slanting across the road like warm metal. The old pickup carried what was left of a life, a few boxes, a handful of tools from the Jensen Soundworks shop, and one vintage microphone I couldn't bring myself to sell. The mountains rose in the distance, quiet and ancient. I drove west, through the switchbacks and winding roads that led toward Aspen. The farther I went, the lighter the air became, thinner, clearer, stripped of everything unnecessary. I had no map, no schedule, only a feeling that I couldn't stay where every street still echoed with the sound of things I'd lost. The cabin I rented sat halfway up a hill, a few miles outside town, a small wooden house with a porch facing a pine forest and a stream threading its way through the valley below. In the mornings, when I opened the door, the air smelled of sap and running water. I began fixing up the back room. The light there came in soft and slanted, just enough. I rebuilt the old recording table, wiped the dust from the microphones, and hung the wooden plaque back on the wall. The same words waited for me, faint but unbroken. Truth has a frequency. For the first few days, I did almost nothing. Just coffee, long walks through the pines, and the quiet pleasure of listening. Sometimes I'd stop in the middle of a trail carpeted with dry needles, close my eyes, and let the sound of the wind move through the trees low, steady, and honest. The sound of freedom, I learned, is not silence. A week later, I opened my laptop, played back a few of my old tapes, and an idea came. A small podcast. I called it Protect What You've Built. Not to teach anyone how to make money, but to remind those who'd lost almost everything, like me, how to keep the part they'd earned. I recorded the first episode using the same microphone I'd built 20 years ago. My voice was rougher now, slower, but more real. I talked about the ways trust can blind you, how paperwork can protect what love can't, and how the law, cold as it is, can sometimes be the only thing that remembers your effort. I didn't name names. I just told the story at the only frequency that mattered, the one of truth. The podcast found its way into the world. First a few dozen listeners, then a few hundred. One morning, Anna called. She said she'd listened to every episode. Her voice was soft, warm, steady. "I'm proud of you, Dad," she said. I looked out the cabin window. The sunlight spilled through a thin veil of mist, turning everything gold. We talked longer than usual, not about the past, but small things. A coffee shop she liked, a film she'd seen. It felt like breathing again. A few weeks later, a letter arrived. Handwritten, blue ink, the signature trembling slightly. Ryan. He wrote that he was sorry for not seeing what was right in front of him, that sometimes people have to lose everything before they understand the weight of honesty. I read it slowly, folded it once, and placed it in the drawer. No anger, no pity. Just the quiet understanding that some lessons are meant to be learned alone. Summer in Aspen came gently. Daylight fell through the pines, leaves shimmering like slivers of glass. At night, the sound of crickets mixed with the creek's low rhythm, a lullaby for the living. I learned to move slower, to listen without fear, to sit in the spaces between sounds and realize they were no longer heavy. Each morning I rose early and walked to the forest's edge. The light filtered through the tall trunks, drawing long, uneven stripes across the path. Every step on the dry leaves sounded like the tapping of a metronome, marking time not in seconds but in peace. One evening, I sat on the porch as the wind came down from the mountains. It carried the faint scent of old snow. I played my latest recording through the small studio monitor. My voice filled the air deep, calm. I spoke about trust, how not everyone deserves it, but how we still need to believe in something to keep moving forward. Trust, I said, has its own sound. It isn't high or low. It doesn't rush or fade. It hums quietly in the chest of those who've made peace with what remains. I thought of Megan not with bitterness anymore, but as someone who had once walked beside me halfway through a life before taking another road. I hoped she'd found her version of peace, wherever she was. I thought of Ryan, wishing him the courage to be honest with himself, at least. And I thought of Anna, the only part of my story that had survived without distortion. When dusk fell, the light turned soft and amber, brushing the tops of the trees. I stood, stepped off the porch, and followed the narrow trail to the edge of the woods. The wind passed through the branches, the leaves shivered, whispering a sound that could almost have been my name. I stopped, tilted my head back, and looked at the sky, turning violet. The world was so still I could hear the beat of my own heart, slow, certain, and even. I closed my eyes and breathed deep. For a moment, it felt as though gravity had let go. Life had played its lowest notes, and now I was standing inside the quiet of its resolution. Not triumph, not sorrow, just the sound of returning home. Faith has its own frequency, and after everything, I was finally hearing it. A year later, autumn returned as if nothing had ever happened. Morning in Aspen was sharp and cold frost, tracing faint patterns on the window, the kind you could almost hear melt. Inside a small cabin tucked against the hillside, I sat before my old recording desk, staring at the title printed on the book cover. Under the soft amber light, my name glimmered on the paper, a quiet engraving I never imagined my life would one day earn. The book took 8 months to write. I wrote by hand, in the cold mornings when mist still clung to the porch rail and the sound of the creek drifted through the valley like steady breath. I didn't write to accuse anyone. I wrote to preserve what had seeped too deep into my blood to forget. Each chapter was a fragment of a road from betrayal to the moment I finally understood that justice isn't something you win. It's something that comes when you stop trying to control it. A small publisher in Denver accepted the manuscript without comment. Months later, they mailed me a proof copy. When I tore open the package, the smell of fresh ink mixed with the scent of pine and old wood. That's when I realized the story had left me. It now belonged to the world, in whatever way it would choose to hear it. They invited me back to Denver for a signing. I hesitated, then said, yes. The day I returned, the sky hung heavy and gray. Rain tapped against the car roof as I drove 4 hours through curling mountain roads, past patches of snow that refused to melt. By late afternoon, Denver rose out of the mist, familiar but distant, like a memory that had learned how to age. The bookstore sat on Lincoln Street, its sign faded silver, the windows throwing soft yellow light onto the wet pavement. When I stepped inside, it was warmer and more crowded than I expected. There were faces lined by time, others still young and unmarked. A few I recognized listeners from the podcast who'd written letters I never thought anyone would send. A middle-aged man said he'd lost his savings trusting the wrong person, but after reading my book, he found the courage to start again. An elderly woman gripped my hand, her voice trembling, saying the story made her stop fearing solitude. I didn't know what to say. I only smiled and signed. Every signature felt like a sigh that had finally turned into peace. And then I saw her Mary. She stood quietly at the back of the line, arms folded, a camel-colored coat framing the same sharp, thoughtful face I remembered. When she reached me, the noise around us seemed to fade. She didn't speak. She simply placed the book in front of me. I signed it, slid it back. She smiled, a small, knowing curve of the lips. Our eyes met, and in that brief silence, there was nothing to forgive. Nothing to reclaim, only the quiet recognition between two people who had once stood on the border between justice and pain. You lived what you wrote, she said softly. That's more than justice. That's freedom. I replied, if it weren't for you, I might still be chasing justice in all the wrong places where it's only noise. We both smiled, not from joy, but from understanding. The event ended as night settled in. I said my goodbyes and stepped out into the street. The rain had stopped. Snow was falling lightly now, melting as it touched the ground. Denver glowed in every direction, the city alive, the glass facades catching the light like ripples on water. I walked slowly. The air was cold and honest. At the third intersection, I stopped. Across the street, parked by the curb, was a silver sedan. I recognized it instantly. Megan's car. I didn't move closer. The windshield was dusted with road salt, a thin layer of grime softening the reflection of streetlights. The license plate was new. The driver's seat was empty. No one inside. I stood there, letting the night wind roll past, smelling of metal and exhaust. The traffic light turned red, then green. Cars moved by, and for a moment, the image of that car shimmered in the puddle at my feet, distorted, silent, but still there. I turned away and kept walking. The street stretched ahead, lamplight spaced evenly like beats on a staff. My steps fell in rhythm with the city's hum, steady, unhurried. Through Civic Center Park, snow dusted the grass like breath. The air was cold enough to sting, clean enough to clear everything else away. I looked up at the pale sky and, for the first time in a long while, felt entirely at peace. Back at the hotel, I cracked the window open and let the night in. On the desk, my book lay beside the old microphone, What Trust Costs In, bold across the cover. The lamp threw a soft halo over the metal surface, catching the reflection of everything I'd survived. I pressed record. My voice came through low and slow, like the steady rhythm of a heart finally done fighting. I said that justice isn't the ending of a story, it's the quiet pause between two chapters of a life. I stopped the recording. Outside, snow kept falling soft, even, cleansing. The city wore white, like forgiveness. Inside, there was only one sound left. the sound of peace. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story reminded you that silence has its own strength, share it so that someone else might remember, too, that sometimes the most righteous thing we can do is to walk away and never look back.